Okay, we are live.
Woo!
Welcome to the Game Audio Hour once again. This is the weekly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences to audio secrets. Here is where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. And sadly, once again, our illustrious leader, the mighty, magnanimous Carl Johnson is under the weather again this week, and Mikey Mike, the maestro Shapiro, is off doing his taxes. Which really, I mean, would you rather be doing your taxes or would you rather be here chilling with us, Vince? I mean, I don't know.
Oh yeah. No, this is so much fun. This is so great. I am putting off doing my taxes because I would rather much hang out with you right now.
It's not just me though. We have our fantastic chat room. Look at the lineup here. We've got the mighty Chase Bethia. We've got Dynamics Audio, Mad BR, Matt M. We've got Super Jill Times, and we're hoping to be joined by others. And yes, indeed, as Matt M has just noticed, behind me is a huge collection of spring mandarins, which are they're actually kind of a crossbreed between a mandarin and an orange, and they're extremely tasty. And we have Sean Lavale has just joined us as well. Hello, everybody. So, Vince, now we thought we would just preface today's show with the fact that Vince and I do have a tendency to go on about tech stuff. But, however, today we do have a very, very interesting non-tech topic that actually we've never talked about on the show, which is actually very fascinating. So please stay tuned for that. But before that, let's talk tech.
Yes, tech. I love tech.
So, just two small announcements. Number one is Facebook users. Who's not a Facebook user these days? Facebook users should be aware that there is actually a really fantastic new Facebook group which has been started by one of our own, the mighty Jack Menhorn, which is called Wise Wizards. That's W Wizards. So there's 4 W's in that, I think. We'll have to check that. But it's Wise Wizards on Facebook, and this is a really great Facebook group to join. It's a public group that you can join, and it's just basically a discussion about everything that Wise. So if you're using Wise and you're stuck, it's a great place to go and ask for help. Or if you're learning Wise, it's a good place to find resources for it. Or if you just love Wise like Jack and I do, then it's a good place just to hang out. And that's the first announcement. Now, the second thing, just as a sort of, perhaps not interesting to a huge majority of people out there, but definitely interesting for me and Vince, is that the wonderful people in Berlin who have brought us the Renoise tracker have announced a tracker plugin for VST and AU formats for other general DAWs. So it's called Redux, R-E-D-U-X. You can search Redux Renoise on Google and you'll find a little preview video of it. Basically what it's going to give you, it's a sampler plugin. It works a bit like plugins like Geist and Guru and Battery, these kinds of sort of drum machine style plugins, except the main advantage that it gives you is that unlike, for example, Geist, which gives you sort of a step sequence, sort of a hardware drum machine kind of interface for putting together phrases to trigger with keys, Redux is going to give you tracker listings. So you can assign a tracker listing to every key on your controller. You can have the tracker listing pitch itself up and down depending on what key you play. You can have it just to have sort of key zones for different tracker listings. So essentially it's going to allow you to do some fantastic sort of glitchy electronica stuff if you like, or making your own arpeggiations from samples, or just using some of Renoise's incredible beat slicing features for super easy, beat slice. If you're doing sort of breakbeat or that kind, or jungle or that kind of stuff, it will be great for that. It's a wealth of possibilities. So go check it out. It's not actually out yet. Matt is asking in the chat room if there's a price. It's not actually out yet.
Yeah, the only thing you can download is a press kit that is going to give you lots of cool pictures and things and features, lists of features. But It is a pretty darn exciting list of features, and I'm really looking forward to trying this, just because there are so many things that I like doing with tracker notation, which I feel like if I insert it in the right way into my traditional DAW projects, I think would open up a whole wealth of possibilities.
Yeah, me too. I'm really looking forward to it because the one deficiency of Renoise, it's not really a deficiency, it's more of a sort of an esoteric way to do things, is Renoise's mixer. Renoise's mixer has very unusual sends. Basically, in a traditional mixer, correct me if I'm wrong, Vince, but you'll have your effect sends as post-fader. So, but in Renoise, your effect sends are actually effect devices that you can insert at any point in your effects chain, and you have the option for the fader to be pre-FX or post-FX. So what that means is that you do have the functionality to do things like send bits and pieces of your dry signal, or getting 100% wet signal through to the fader, or different things like that. But more often than not, all you'll want to use effect sends for is just to send it out to an effects bus. However, because the effect send operates in a slightly esoteric way, it can be a little bit difficult to do things like gain staging anyway, so this will actually give you the capability to make the best of the efficiency and the speed and the granular control of a tracker interface with the DAWs that you're used to, and of course all of their mixing features. And if you're wanting to get an idea of what Redux will be like, one thing you can do is actually go and download the demo of Renoise. In Renoise, you'll see that one of the tabs along the top is called Sampler. Essentially, Redux is going to be like a slightly more fully featured version of Renoise's Sampler. So if you go to the Sampler and just play around in there, that's basically what you're going to have access to in the VST or AU plugin. So there you go.
Yeah, this looks cool. Just watching this this short video that's on the website without the sound, I can see some really interesting things that I want this to be part of my workflow right now.
Yeah, it's been actually, I've known of this, it's been on the Renoise forums, they've been talking about it for I think about 6 months. I think when they released Renoise 3, they also announced that the Redux plugin was coming. But this is the first that we've actually seen of it. So looking at the video, the fact that there is a video and it shows it functioning, it means we're probably a month or 2 months away. I guess that they're testing at the moment. Who knows? Anyway, something to look forward to for those people who enjoy tracker interfaces or just more granular control of what they're doing. And Vince, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about TouchOSC.
TouchOSC. Well, TouchOSC is pretty great. I actually use 2 different iPad MIDI input apps. TouchOSC is one of them, and it is probably one of the most popular ones available. What I often use it for is for adding extra control, really robust, high-resolution control for certain soft synths that I use. And actually, let me just bring up TouchOSC right now. Here is a template for one of the instruments that I have here, which is called Friedlander Violin. And Friedlander Violin is a wonderful sampled violin. It runs in Contact, and they've provided the ability to interface with it with TouchOSC, and they provided all these different tools for controlling everything that you can do with a violin on a single iPad screen, because there's a lot of stuff that you can do with it. And in many other soft synths, you're reduced to controlling it with CCs or key switches and having to manage all of those things. But with TouchOSC, I know exactly what I'm doing here, which is I'm primarily using my left hand and having 2 or 4 fingers on the 2 large areas that are on the left in order to control the volume and intensity and quality of the note that I'm actually playing, and then various either momentary or toggle switches on the right side to further control the sound. And this provides not quite 100% of the sound functionality in this particular soft synth, but maybe 90%. But it does that 90% in a really fast and easy way. Of course, you could use TouchOSC and customize your own templates for a lot of soft synths and libraries that are out there. But I think one thing that's really cool is a lot of sample library developers are actually developing with TouchOSC in mind. And so you have things like this, which is really cool. So a lot of the stuff that I do has to do with orchestral mock-up and doing really realistic and especially emotional types of performances out of your virtual synths. And things like TouchOSC with these various tools, I think, is indispensable for the way I work.
It's not that it matters that much, but I will say TouchOSC looks fantastic, doesn't it?
It does look really, really good.
I mean, especially if you're a Star Trek Next Generation fan. No, that doesn't. Yeah. That's of course not really relevant. But yeah, the reason I ask is it looks like later on this year I may have the opportunity to do a live performance of some electronic music, and I've only done live like once decades ago, and that was with with hardware. So I'm just been sort of looking at the different options for how I can put this together. Obviously, the obvious choice is Ableton Live. And of course, it is the obvious choice because it's built entirely around the features and the what you would need for putting together a live electronic performance. However, you know, being a tracker user, also being a somebody who doesn't have huge amounts of money to throw away at Ableton, I'm sort of looking at other different kinds of options, and it looks like one of a really cool option is going to be Native Instruments Tractor, controlled by TouchOSC. So Native Instruments Tractor, as you know, it's DJ software, and obviously the basic usage for it is to mix together tracks of music, of course. However, in the recent versions of Tractor, they have what they call the remix sets, which are basically banks of samples. You could put tracks in there as well, but just small banks of triggerable samples that can be triggered in time with the clock tempo. So it sort of becomes like Ableton Live, except with probably less of the editing features of Ableton. Actually, none of the editing features, but just basically playback, synchronized playback of a whole range of different things. And it seems to me that being that I'm not a live user, and being that I'm going to have to do this in front of people with some degree of reliability, having everything bounce down to stems out of Renoise anyway is what I'm going to be doing, so I don't really benefit much from what Live can offer, whereas going with a super solid, performance tool like Tractor seems like it's going to be a cool option. So that's why I was looking at the different different iPad controllers for Tractor, and it seems like the one app that bridges Renoise as well as Tractor, as well as Ableton, as well as many other different DAWs, and as you said, many other software synthesized instruments as well, is TouchOSC. So I bought it last night. How difficult is it to set up custom templates?
It's not difficult at all. Actually, they do have the facility for editing some stuff on your iPad or iPhone, but most of the time you're just going to do it in the app. I'm on Windows, and I just load up something. I can load up various layouts that people have available online, download them, and then muck about with them. That's really the nice thing. I can copy, paste, borrow ideas from one layout, put this into another layout. It's not that CC. I'll just change these continuous controllers to these continuous controllers. I actually want to duplicate this and put it across channels. The app that they have for editing layout on your desktop is actually very easy to deal with.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I like it a lot. There's probably only one issue that I have, which is the fact that it's not easy to edit it on the iPad itself. And I actually think I started out mentioning that TouchOSC is actually one of two apps that I use for controlling anything that's going on in my DAW with my iPad. The other one is something called S1 MIDI trigger, and actually it sucks in terms of allowing you to edit layouts on your desktop, but it's actually incredibly good about editing stuff when the only thing that you have is your iPad. It has a really good facility for editing that stuff. So some of the functionality that I use my iPad for is sort of duplicated between TouchOSC and S1 MIDI trigger. Honestly, if those two were combined, I think that would be the absolute perfect iPad, tablet, Android, whatever MIDI functionality adding app. It would just be so good. But those two, I think, are really the two that I would put money into. Thankfully, it's not a whole lot of money. It's only something like $5 or $6 for each one of those, I think.
Yeah, I was shocked that when I looked at the sort of ubiquity of TouchOSC and the reliability that people talk about it with, I just thought, wow, this is going to cost like $15, but it sounds like it's going to be worth it. And then it's just like $5. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Can I pay 3 times?
It really is. Yeah, and the developers for those apps are just so easy to talk to. I've actually had email conversations for dealing with bugs or adding features. And hey, here's something in the new version. They email me and say, hey, yeah, there's going to be a new version. It's going to have this feature that you asked for. It's great. I love these apps.
That's great. Do you find that it's the necessity to edit your templates on the actual iPad itself? Is that purely for you sort of an ergonomic thing, that it's just easy if you've got your software synthesizer, if you've got your synth up here and you've got your interface down here, is it just easier to go through and just make a quick control change modification down here than actually boot up the TouchOSC app and do all of that way? Or what's the necessity there for having it editable on the actual device?
Yeah, I mean, there are just a few little things. Like, I know that this soft synth does some wonky things on me, or I know that the patch that I currently have here, let's say I start doing a version of an overblown sound of a sax or a clarinet when my CC2 gets above a certain range, and I'm not using my ELI, I'm actually controlling it with my iPad. On TouchOSC, I might find myself having to load up a whole other layout for that. On S1 MIDI trigger, I might just go into Edit, restrict the range of the slider to only output certain CCs, and then now I've got a usable clarinet or sax that I don't have to worry about doing the overblown tone.
Oh, I see.
Just little things like that. It's really just a very small thing. But there are some cases where I want to quickly edit in a few seconds, as opposed to, it can take a few minutes. 5 minutes multiplied by so many times if you want to do so many edits over the course of a session, that can add up.
Is it how is the latency? So when you're performing and you're touching away, do you actually hear much of a delay between your input and the output?
I don't really hear much latency at all. So I actually use, since I'm a Windows guy, and if you're on Mac, it's actually rather easier to interface an iPad and use Bonjour networking with your Mac and have it show up as a MIDI interface. On Windows, I actually have an extra step, which is RTP MIDI. And it's a little piece of software that lets you use Bonjour networking with your Windows machine. And I'm just playing around with TouchOSC right now, and it's telling me that my latency is pretty good. It's 27 milliseconds right now. And 27 milliseconds is within, 27 milliseconds. This is over Wi-Fi, by the way. So my computer is on Wi-Fi, and my iPad is on Wi-Fi. So probably a worst case scenario. I'm also in an office where everyone else is on Wi-Fi, or at least some of them. So it's kind of a worst-case scenario but that's still within a single frame of video.
Right.
Yeah,
how would you set it up with, for example, if you're in a club and you don't have access to any network, is there a way to set it up via a hardware cable?
Let's see. I'm pretty sure you can. I've just never had to deal with it. At one time, when I was showing this to my class at school, hey, you could use your iPad for making music and sound. That's cool. and I just set up an ad hoc network connection, and that was actually easy enough.
Okay, cool. Well, interesting. So that's
It's really fun to play with.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to. I mean, I've got to put together the music for this performance first, obviously, but I'm looking forward to getting into, especially creating a custom layout because because TouchOSC just looks so nice. Those lines, it's all very neon, very Tron.
Yeah, it's so smooth and clean. I remember thinking before that, oh man, am I going to have to upgrade my iPad to a 3 or an iPad Air? Actually, I just still have my old iPad 2 from a few years back, and it works and it looks great on it. Yeah, no problems.
Fantastic. All right, well, enough of the gear talk. We have a very interesting topic that we were just chatting a little bit about prior to going live here. I don't think we've ever really discussed this, but it's an interesting topic that sort of blends sound design together with like psychoacoustic perception together with linguistics. So here we go. We're going to be talking about the Japanese idea of Kotodama. So Vince, would you like to explain what Kotodama actually means and how it applies to game audio?
Wow, Kotodama. It's kind of funny that you're asking me to explain this, since you're the one that's currently living in Japan right now.
Well, I'm going to add my contributions in a moment once we get into it. This is a very deep, interesting topic.
Yes, it is. So Kotodama. So Kotodama is an interesting Japanese compound word, and Koto means literally word, and Dama means spirit. So if you look at the two kanji for Kotodama, you would see word spirit. And what Kotodama refers to is this idea that words can give rise to meaning and action. So whenever you watch an anime or you play a video game and you see Ryu in Street Fighter and he shouts Hadouken as he puts out his fists and a fireball comes out, that Hadouken, his saying the word Hadouken, constitutes Kotodama. Or if you play, or if you watch Dragon Ball, that's probably that's an even more famous example. But in Dragon Ball, Goku is constantly saying Kamehameha in order to do that big fire blast of an attack. That's also Kotodama. In perhaps more down-to-earth sort of examples, like if you've been in a martial arts class, you'll often hear the students and the masters as well saying certain things, certain utterances. Maybe it's a word, or maybe just it's a shout or a scream, and those would be called ki. But it's your spirit, your ki, or your feelings actually expressed in the actual action, the martial arts movement or technique that's expressed there. And I was actually thinking a lot about this, partly because I am a sound designer and I'm dealing constantly with this balance of sound design for sound effects and sound design for dialogue. And also lately I've been working a lot on fighting games where this happens a lot, like Street Fighter and various other Japanese fighting games as well as action games, where if you listen to Ryu's fireball in Street Fighter, you can't really tell me the sound that the fireball makes as it's flying from his hands across the stage. I mean, there must be a sound, but we don't remember that sound. What we do remember is Ryu saying, Hadouken, Hadouken, Hadouken. So, and I think that's actually really interesting, and I think it would be really cool to hear what you might have to say about that, Alex, since you're in Japan right now, and I feel like you probably see even more examples of this than I do.
Well, I think just this is all very theoretical, but from a linguistics point of view, you see a lot of that in the Japanese language, and it comes back to an idea that is fairly deeply rooted, not so much just in Japanese society, but also in in an anthropological kind of sense as well, that it's possible to affect your inner state by doing or changing something in your outer state. So what that means is, for example, a simple example is if you shave yourself nicely, put on a really nice suit and a nice tie, and polish your shoes, and do your hair up and put on some aftershave or whatever. You try to make yourself looking sharp. You kind of feel sharp, and you kind of feel like I'm dressed for success. You're ready for action. It's the same kind of thing with in many cases in Japanese culture, that there is this understanding that by affecting your outer self, you change the way that you feel on the inside. And then, so that bleeds into linguistically. There are a lot of interesting phrases in Japanese that they say. There's a phrase for it. However, in English or in Western languages, commonly, we don't ever say that. But of course, we're all human, and of course, we understand the feeling. We may have other ways of expressing it, but we don't actually verbalize it. So, I mean, a really simple example for anybody who knows even a little bit of Japanese, you'll know that, for example, there is this famous phrase in Japanese which is "yoroshiku onegaishimasu." "Yoroshiku onegaishimasu," which means when you meet somebody or when you're starting something new, you say this. It actually means I humbly beg that you go easy on me. is what it actually means if you literally translate it. And of course, we don't say that, but we do other things that will kind of express the same kind of feeling. For example, in the West, we may shake hands. If I meet you for the first time, we may shake hands. Or, for example, if you and I are going to be working on a team together, and we're going to be developing a product together, even if you and I have known each other for a year and a half as we have, we may still do this in Japan. We may just say to each other, well, we're going to be working together from now on, so I humbly beg that you go easy on me. Right. So that feeling there, by verbalizing it, the idea is that you affect your inner state to sort of feel more open to this new change. So that's where the idea of kiai comes from. Well, it's only me theorizing, but that's where I think it comes from. Kiai itself, ki is like chi, which means sort of inner force, and ai is kind of like to bring together, or to sort of collect together. And so the idea of when you're fighting in martial arts, ha, that kind of thing, os, those kinds of things that they say. Basically, the idea is, again, by verbalizing something outwardly, you affect what's on the inside. You get yourself ready for what you're going to do. So that's the reason why in martial arts they say they do things like the kiai, and then of course in video games, I guess this I don't know for sure, but I guess it probably comes from the anime and manga roots. Where if somebody's going to do something, they say what they're going to do. They give it a sort of a noun title like that to announce that this is what I'm going to do, and it's a kind of kiai. It's a kind of a collection of their inner determination to do something. So when it comes to a game like Street Fighter, which is where I guess the earliest incarnations of game Kotodama comes from, I suppose it branches out from that basically, to give more of a sort of a conceptual branding to what it is that this character is going to do, we're going to have them actually say the name of the move like a kiai. So that's where you get, Tatsumaki Senpu Kyaku or Hadouken or Shoryuken or all those kinds of different Kotodama words. So I think it's kind of like an auditory branding, if you like, but it comes from that martial arts idea of kiai, which comes from the idea of affecting your inner state by doing something on the outer state. There you go.
Wow. No, that makes a lot of sense. I never really thought about that as, that example of when you dress yourself up, you're preparing for something. I can see how that expression is this little mini ritual that helps to establish that even further.
You see that all through Japanese culture, and sometimes it's quite comical. Sometimes, there's no need for that level of exterior preparation for what it is that you're going to do internally. A fine example that I remember about 10 years ago, I went to play some table tennis, and they have the table tennis area. There's a net, and then next to it, there's pool tables and billiard tables, right? And the I remember when I was playing table tennis, I looked over and I see this guy who's come in by himself, and he's got like the pool cue bag. Do you call it pool in the States? You do, right?
Yeah, pool. Yeah.
He's got this like snooker bag, and he unzips it like this, and it's like in two parts, and he's like screwing it up there, and then he's like taking sort of 15 minutes to get the perfect film of dust, of chalk, on the tip of the cue. It's not quite right yet. It's going like this. And it's like taking all this time to do this. And then you look at how he's dressed, and he's got like, this is a Sunday afternoon at like 2 p.m., right? And he's there by himself, but he's wearing a little bow tie, and he's got the black vest, and he's got a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up with a little kind of clip on the top here, and he's got this slick kind of nice pressed black slacks, and he's got shiny black leather shoes and kind of slicked hair, right? It's like a young Japanese guy, and he looks like a professional snooker player. That's how he looks. Right? Okay. So and of course you can see where this is going. So he's got this perfect film of chalk, and then he's like lining these snooker balls up on the table, and he's got them all perfect. And he's just like taking about 40 minutes just to get ready. Now you can see what's going to happen next, right? And he lines up and he takes his shot and straight into the felt. and it turns out that he's actually a terrible snooker player, but in his mind, the idea, of course, it's a bit comical, and of course he was clearly, a fairly eccentric kind of character, I'm sure, and it's not a good example of how Japanese people regularly are. But in his mind, he's preparing himself for this act of practicing snooker by himself, and so he's got this exterior. It's like it's a non-verbal kie, Mm-hmm. So it's almost as like he's going to like line himself up for a shot, and he's going to say something like, super pull break, and then go and like drive a line into the felt.
Hold on. Now I'm just actually want to see if there are any pool or billiards manga out there. There must be. I want to read that.
He's probably yeah. So actually, coming back to the idea of it being sort of like auditory branding. In the sense that, as you said, I thought it was interesting. You said that, for example, with the Street Fighter games, you don't remember the kind of sound that you get when the fireball goes across the screen. You don't remember that. Everybody just remembers the Hadouken, Hadouken, Hadouken. Does the Kotodama, or the words to replace the sound, is it an effective replacement for the sound effect, or is it just a different replacement for the sound effect, where neither is more effective at being evocative of what's actually happening? It's just different. What do you think?
Yeah, that's really tough. Right now, I'm actually just last week finished up work on one of the DLC characters for Skullgirls, and so that's going to be coming up. And I was constantly thinking about this because we've got this new character, and he's got all these moves, and they're big moves. He's a pro wrestler type characters, and he's got these big moves with a lot of screen filling effects, and a little bit of fire swashes all around, and big hits on the mat, and lots of things that should be the impetus for lots of cool, impactful sounds. And I was constantly fighting with the sound of that, for which I did lots of Foley recording even. Had some fun sounds of actually a folding chair, where I recorded a folding chair hitting a bunch of different types of material. It made some really cool sounds. But in the end, what ended up feeling right, and it's hard to say whether it's because this is what I think sounded best, or if it's because of that amazing influence of Street Fighter II from back in 1990 or whatever. I decided that it needs to be more about the call-outs of these moves, for which we actually had lots of different varieties of stuff. There is him actually saying the move. Then there's also the option of an off-screen announcer in the style of a pro wrestling match saying, "Oh, he's going for this big special move." That sort of announcement. And then there's even a crowd that is going to create their own noise, and they will actually do the sounds of hits by anticipating them and calling them out with "ha ha ha ha" in conjunction with this wrestler's hits. And you actually end up hearing in the final product, well, hopefully it's the final product after it passes format and all that stuff that DLC has to pass, but you end up hearing more of his voice, the audience, and the announcer than the obvious impact sounds and even the flashy fire swash effects that happen. There's this really big flashy blue fire swash as his character rushes across the screen, and it ends up being 90% the sound of him, and the sound of this fire swash actually is really maybe 10% the sound. If you listen closely for it, you'll hear it. And we put this in front of people because for Skullgirls, we have this fun thing that we do where every week we let people see what it is we're working on. Here are the latest updates to the game. And people really liked it. They really liked the sound of his voice far more than just the sound of the effects. And the effects were actually in there much earlier than his voice because we ended up recording the character voice for him a little bit later than we started implementing the sound effects. But it was all about the voice. They loved the voice for this game.
That's I have another interesting question here on that point. Do you think that, firstly, do you think it works in English? Is it a sort of a nostalgia thing connected to, those Japanese phrases that came from those early fighting games? I mean, there is a certain mystique about languages that you don't understand. When you don't understand what, like Messatsu Hadouken, if you don't actually understand what that means, it sounds really cool. Whereas if you are Japanese and you know that Messatsu Hadouken means mega kill wave motion punch, which is like, what? I mean, if you actually had that in a video game, it was all in English, and he gets to, and then he says, mega kill, what is it? Mega kill wave motion punch. And if it was actually in English, do you think a lot of that sort of that punchiness of that kind of Kotodama would be lost?
Right. Well, in the case of Skullgirls, it is all in English, which is interesting. So, he is calling out these names, but we actually do the American thing with it, which is we change up how he says it. In Street Fighter, whenever he says Hadouken, it's always Hadouken. It's the exact same Hadouken sound.
Right.
And actually, it isn't until you get to the late Street Fighters, like not even the late 90s, but the mid 2000s, where they actually do a couple of different recordings of Hadouken, Hadouken, like that.
Right.
But here we'll actually do some slight variations on the move, and he might say something more generic, like "take that," as opposed to the actual name of the move sometimes.
Interesting. That's really interesting. I wonder why in those early, for example, in the relatively later Capcom games, I wonder why they never randomized those phrases, because surely the technology and the storage capacity for those samples must have been there. I wonder why. I wonder if it could have something, I'm really speculating now, but I wonder if it could have something to do with getting a defined, consistent sonic signature for that move, so that it's always Hadouken, 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 exactly the same.
Right.
As like a sort of an auditory branding.
Yeah, the musicality of those phrases is really important. Like I don't remember the original sound of the fireball, but it's not just the word Hadouken that I remember from the original Street Fighter 2. It's the musicality of that phrase, and that's such an important thing. And
yeah, go ahead.
Go. Oh, no, I was just going to go on actually another track, which is when thinking about music. It actually makes me think about about Walter Murch actually and his ideas about sound mixing and editing. And of course, Walter Murch is the famous film editor, Apocalypse Wow and Godfather and The Conversationalist and all sorts of great pieces of filmmaking. And he talks about the various functionalities of sound and how different sound has different functionalities. Some sound is made to be felt and experienced, and he would call that embodied sound, and music would fall into this category, feeling the music, the emotion of the music. And some sound is meant to be very strictly decoded, and it has a very specific meaning. And language often, but not always, falls into this.
I see.
And he would compartmentalize his sounds into different things. Some that would be really hot, warmer, embodied sounds, and some sounds would be cooler sounds that were meant to be decoded. And then there would be some sounds that would be in the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're in a horror movie, and there is the creak of a door. And of course that adds atmosphere, and you feel something from that. But it also says something very specific to the audience, which is, oh, there's someone here who you don't know about, right? So everything is on that gradient, and you use that as a tool to help you with mixing decisions. And I started thinking about how Kotodama sort of straddles that gradient in a very weird way. You know, Hadoken is a word, and it means kind of a silly word. It means wave motion punch, cool. But more importantly, it does have a very clean connection to this specific game mechanic. If you pull off that motion, quarter circle forward, fierce punch, you will get this move. It's specifically tied to that particular game mechanic, which is cool. And it's...
Can I just interject a question at that point, because this is really interesting. Do you think that... So you've said that the Merch is saying, it's really fascinating, I never thought about this before, but Merch is saying that there are sections of sounds that need to be parsed, and there's a section of sounds that just sort of are absorbed and create some kind of emotional response. And then there's sort of an in-between area. If you place the kind of Kotodama perhaps more in the middle, as being sort of needing to be parsed, but sort of felt emotionally as a success signification that you've done something. Do you think that could just be because Japanese is not your native language, or for the majority of like Western players of games like Street Fighter, the Japanese is not their native language? I mean, the fact that it's interesting that it's true that different languages, it's different language. I mean, language as an expressional tool is equal, and all languages are beautiful and wonderful and magical and amazing. However, certain languages lend themselves to certain things just from an aesthetic, like a sonic point of view. I mean, for example, the British accent has it's a wonderfully wonderfully expressive, evocative kind of accent. The American accent works fantastic in music. For just the way that the syllables and the consonants work, it works. The vowel sounds just works fantastic in music. The Australian accent is good for absolutely nothing, except for maybe Russell Crowe and stupid Foster's advertisements. However, and then of course you have Asian languages which are all good for different things too. Mandarin Chinese is absolutely stunningly beautiful when you hear Chinese poetry read in Mandarin Chinese, or if you've got like a martial arts movie in Cantonese, that packs a punch. Japanese, on the other hand, just because of the nature of the language, the fact that there are no, other than there are no actual sounds that end in a consonant in Japanese. They all start with consonants and end in vowels. So the result of that is that it's a very kind of sort of very punchy kind of sound, and seems to lend itself very nicely to shouting.
Yeah.
Although Japanese people don't shout that much. But I'm just wondering whether the fact that because Japanese has a nice sound for those kinds of like tatsumaki senpu kyaku, it has a nice sound for that kind of application. Even from Japanese people, they may not hear it so much, they may not parse it so much. However, for somebody who doesn't understand Japanese at all, not saying that's you, Vince, because you do understand Japanese a little bit, but for somebody who doesn't understand Japanese at all, it's purely Sonic, and therefore I'm just wondering whether it really deserves to be even on the side of, in the middle between being parsed and being absorbed, simply
Right.
because it's not understood as language. It's understood as a signature sound in the game.
Right. Yeah. I was originally thinking about putting it in the middle, and then the more I thought about it, I thought, actually, maybe it's something that goes even further than language. In other words, we don't know Japanese. I certainly didn't know Japanese when I first played Street Fighter 2. And Hadoken didn't mean anything to me as a word. But that was okay, actually. It's not about whether the sound effect is decoded into a particular word or phrase that means something linguistically to you. In video games, what was really important was that that word, that utterance, actually translated very specifically to this mechanic. And that mechanic was something that was rewarding in and of itself. One of the things about Street Fighter at the time was it pushed in the arcade, back in the 80s, pretty much all of your arcade machines had an 8-way joystick and 3 buttons. And every now and then you would see something more than that. Yes, of course, there was Defender well before then, which had lots of buttons. You had other things like rotary encoders and whatnot. But Street Fighter 2, what it wanted to do was it wanted to reward you for learning the rather obtuse physical, mechanical vocabulary that was required to drive any one of these 8 characters in the game. And that reward came about not just as a visual and a mechanical, with potentially incurring damage on your opponent, but also aural with that Hadoken. And it wasn't just Hadoken; it was also the Yoga Flame and the spinning bird kick. Why does Chun-Li say spinning bird kick in English, anyways?
That's a good question.
But all of those things, it actually goes even cooler. So in Walter Murch's Gradient, hot sounds are these things that are felt. Music, it's warm, it's emotive. And then cold sounds are things that are decoded, and you decode them into these specific concepts and thoughts, and maybe it's a plot point, or maybe it's a plot point, a revelation in the story, a piece of knowledge about a character. But with video games, that Hadoken, even though it means something, and maybe because of the fact that it's actually something that we as non-Japanese video game players wouldn't actually be able to decode, we actually are able to decode it because we don't care about decoding the word into Wave Motion Punch. We care about connecting it to this particular game mechanic. And that's really the most important thing. Creating, maybe it is a really emotive sound. Maybe it's an impactful sound. Maybe it's a really dynamic sound or a musical cue even. But the fact that it is connected to a very specific game mechanic. In the case of Street Fighter, it is the motion of the controller. Or maybe if you're playing a puzzle game, it could be a specific solution for a puzzle, or hitting choosing the right door in an adventure game. And it actually becomes a very cold sound. It is something that you understand very specifically in the context of this game. This is its meaning, far beyond the linguistic meaning. And there's something there that I think is really interesting about how you can make sounds that can be made up of words, or maybe it could be musical. I tend to make a lot of musical sounds for various projects. But because it's in the context of a game, you actually have to think about it in terms of how it's decoded by the players and how they actually are using it in the context of gameplay.
It's certainly the case in the opposite direction, because you get many Japanese fighting games, especially later on, for example, the Virtua Fighter series comes to mind, where the characters are Western, so you get sort of like, the Jackie Bryant character who's speaking English as he fights. And in those situations, obviously, Japanese players don't. No, of course, there will be a lot of Japanese people who do understand it, but the majority of players potentially the actual meaning of the English goes over their head, and Jackie may be saying, "You just can't stop me," and they don't, you just can't stop me. What is that? They don't understand what that means, but the fact that he says that when you win a round, again, it's flipping it around the other way, where it's that perhaps in that situation, it's much, much less the case that it's something to be parsed, so it's on the side, the cold sound. It's much more the case that, congratulations, you've won this round, here's your reward. Some English that you don't understand, but it sounds American, so that's
sounds
cool.
Cool.
Yeah. So then I wonder if it's possible to have these kinds of, for example, if you want to fill up a game of verbal hot sounds, is it possible to have a game where it's just, it'd be a very experimental thing, but verbal hot sounds? So just going back, hot means that it's something that you absorb and you intrinsically sort of understand even though you don't parse the meaning of the language or the sound. Cold means it's the opposite, where you parse and you decode a meaning out of what it is that you're listening to, and with very little emotional impact. I wonder if it's possible then, to have a game where it's just hot verbal sounds. Open the door, close the door, close the door, close the door. Footsteps, footsteps, footsteps.
Oh man,
that'd be an interesting experiment. Maybe for your students, you might want to have them try that. Just make a game, have a simple 3D style game, and then just only use verbal sounds, but create the voiceover sounds in such a way that they won't be parsed or decoded as cold sounds, but instead they'll be absorbed and just taken on as hot sounds.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me actually of there was a YouTube video of I think it was a German film director that recorded a short film about an American couple, American in quotes, because they're speaking what sounds like American English to people who don't know American English.
Yeah, I've seen that. It's really, really good. It's like it's called "What English Sounds Like to People Who Don't Speak English" or something like that.
Yeah, but it's cool. Even without the words, there are components. There's the musicality of it, the rhythm, the texture of the words that are used at particular times, the way that words will overlap when people interrupt each other, and that has a particular tone to it. And that's really interesting to think about what words are capable of outside of just the word that is ostensibly being decoded out of it, because there's an interesting tone there.
That's really true, because I think when you speak a language, once you start to understand a language, you can't not understand it anymore. You can't. It's a one-way street. You can't go back to that feeling of just sort of mystery and magic about hearing a language purely as music, as like linguistic music, and not being able to parse anything that you're getting. I think one of the reasons that I originally started learning Japanese ages and ages ago was just because of all those fighting games. Wow, that language sounds really cool. When he says that, wow, that's cool. That language must be really cool. Now that I've been in Japan for 15 years, and I don't really have any difficulty with Japanese anymore. It's almost a bit sad that now when I play those old games, I can actually understand what they're saying, and it's not that cool anymore. When you understand what he's saying, it's kind of the equivalent of if you imagine that you're playing this game, and the more that you play it, the more you actually understand what they're saying is English. For example, as like an equivalent, and so after playing it for 15 years, you realize that all they're saying is mega kill wave motion punch. And all of a sudden, it's like, no, it's not so. So it's a one-way street. You can't go back to sort of that time when you didn't understand the language and you weren't able to parse it. And so that video where it shows what English sounds like to non-English speakers is fascinating, because you often wonder, as English speakers ourselves, what does our language sound like to people who don't understand it? because such a mishmash of different influences, and even like unlike Chinese and Japanese and Korean and these northeast, actually most of the Asian languages, it's very impure sonically English, whereas the Northeast Asian and the Southeast Asian languages are extremely pure. That they're you may even in Japanese.
Precision. Yeah.
Right. In Japanese, you may get spinning bird or kiku. It's actually spinning bird or kiku, just as made up of Japanese sounds. It's like they're very sonically very pure, and so it'd be really interesting to know. Yeah, I guess that video gives some insight maybe into what English does sound like to people who don't speak it. I want to read a nice comment from our buddy Sean LaVale here in the chat room. He says that I'd say I'm used to hearing Japanese, although usually in anime or anime VG settings. That is to say, I understand those Kotodama words in fighting games and anime on a cultural level beyond the signature sound aspect. And I think it does have an impact, not just in providing a signature sound, but also in conveying the idea of Kotodama without an explicit cultural explanation. Yeah, so that's a really good point, and I think that it's very interesting then to reflect, just on the position and the contribution to video games that even Japanese language has had, and that sort of Japanese culture of Kie and Kotodama. That's very, yeah. Well, look at that. We're approaching the end of the show, Vince.
Yeah, wow.
This has been
we ended up spending quite a bit of time on that. I think it was really cool, though.
Yeah, this is what happens, everybody, when Vince and Alex try our best not to talk about tech. You get this instead.
I think we had I think that was a pretty interesting conversation there.
Yeah, it is.
I loved.
Go ahead.
I love the examples that you had for it. I had certainly thought about it in various ways over the years, but I loved some of the examples that you gave to help sell the idea of it more than just the words themselves.
It's Japan is a really interesting country like that, and it's very, very, very different. It's the only way to put it. So anyway, we're hoping that our illustrious leader, the mighty rock god himself, Carl Johnson, will be back to join us next week. He's very much under the weather at the moment, so everybody send your good best wishes, get well vibes in the general direction of Ventura. Is that where he lives?
Yeah, up in Ventura, California.
Yep, and as always, Game Audio Hour. We are here at Mondays, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time in the States. And please find us on Facebook and Twitter at Game Audio Hour. Like away, follow away. We also have on the Facebook group, we have sometimes some discussion that goes on. We actually also have a forum, which some of us do have a dip into every now and then. But the best place to find us is right here and in the chat room, which is gameaudiohour.com/live. So if you're listening to this on a podcast, then please be sure to come and stop by and meet our fantastic chatties. Thanks to all the regulars, all the newies, and it's been great, Vince.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
All right, so I'm now going to do a Kyle here and hit this massive, big red stop broadcast button. So thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Bye.